Hi, my name is Erwin Lazar, Vice President and Service Director at Nemertes Research, and welcome to our monthly webinar entitled 2016 Contact Centers, What You Need to Know. This webinar consists of an interactive presentation and moderated Q&A period. To submit a question, please use the control panel on GoToWebinar. If you experience any technical difficulties, please contact us at webinars@nemertes.com. Once we finish the webinar, you will be presented with a short survey. Please do answer the questions and provide some feedback on this webinar, as well as input for content for future webinars. We use that as we develop our webinar schedule for the year. We'll also ask you if you'd like to participate in our research. As my colleague Lisa Durant goes through the benchmark, you'll note that the data that we pull from are interviews of people like yourself, if you're with an end user organization. And if you're willing to participate, if you're willing to spend an hour on the phone with us, you'll get a lot of insight into the results and the opportunity to converse with Lisa as well. So please do indicate if you're willing to participate. For those of you who would like a replay or would like to share a replay with colleagues, we usually post it on our website in about a week. So please let us know if you'd like replay access. And those of you who are clients, we'd be happy to send you a copy of the slides as well. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce Lisa Durant. Actually, let me go ahead and just quickly go through the agenda, and then I'll introduce Lisa. We'll talk quickly about Nemertes and about the benchmark. And Lisa will share some of the findings from the data that she gathered, how she gathered it, what it says, what are some of the key takeaways, what are the things that you as a contact center professional or a vendor or service provider in the contact center space should understand about the contact center market. She'll wrap up with some recommendations, and we'll talk a little bit about some of our upcoming research and some of our upcoming webinars as well. So Lisa, if you can jump to the next slide. So quickly about Nemertes, we are now in our 14th year of providing research, insight, expert decision-making services to end-user organizations. We are predominantly focused on gathering data from end-user companies on how they use technology, what they buy, what drives their business cases, what they spend, how they rate their vendors. And again, tying into what you're about to hear, the source of this data comes directly from end-user organizations. It's through direct interviews of participants, not survey-based, although some of our cost data does include some surveys. Lisa will go into the source of our data in much more detail. But what we try and provide is how enterprises are quantifying the investments in their technology, how they're making decisions. We guide our enterprise clients in making more informed decisions by being able to leverage the expertise of their peers and the experiences of their peers as well. Go to the next slide. Before we jump into the presentation, I'd like to remind everyone that we hold our annual Navigator 360 conference each summer. This year it'll be July 25th through the 27th at the beautiful Los Don Cesar Resort in St. Pete Beach, Florida, the big pink building on the beach. The focus this year is around enterprise digital transformation, or leading the digital enterprise transformation. So kind of what we're looking at there, and this is very much a conference focused on senior level IT practitioners, C-level, director level, vice president level. We're looking at helping you not only learn from your peers, but help you understand what are the challenges around digital transformation from an infrastructure perspective, an operations and organizational strategy perspective. How do you measure success? How do you measure the value of the investments that you're making? How do you help guide business down the right path? How do you deal with things like security and risk, leveraging capabilities like automation and IT as a service to reduce complexity, to speed, agility, and so on. So this has been a great event. This is I believe this will be our 6th year now of doing this conference. It is always a wonderful opportunity for the attendees to get to know one another and to learn from each other. We've got some wonderful featured speakers lined up. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Lisa Durant. Lisa heads our contact center and customer engagement research, as well as working with organizations to help guide them in their strategy as they make their decisions around not only contact center platforms and technologies, but how do they increasingly engage with customers through a variety of different channels, different media, and helping them understand the change in the audience and the customer expectations for successful integration. So Lisa, take it away.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. So we do have a lot to cover, so I'm not going to waste any time. Let's start by just going over some details of the primary research project from which I will be pulling and presenting these findings and data points. It's our 2015-2016 Contact Center and Customer Engagement Benchmark. And if you're unfamiliar with that project, basically what we do is create some hypotheses and questions about where we expect the industry to be moving. We do review those with our clients to see if there are other questions or areas of interest for us to add. Then we go out and we speak live on the phone with a number of IT decision makers, or in my case, both folks, IT folks as well as those leading the operational side of contact center. We usually speak to between 30 to 50 different companies. And we ask them these pre-developed questions. We also capture a lot of context around their responses. And then we go through and analyze those results, and that's where we pull our benchmark data from. So as you can see here in this year's customer engagement benchmark, we had a wide variety of participants from different verticals and different sizes of contact center, a bit more in the 500 or fewer agent contact center. We did have quite a few participants from what we'd consider large or even very large companies, so typically over 2,500 employees and over $1 billion in revenue. We also always ask participants to self-rate their company's IT culture, that is, their appetite for adopting new technology. And this year, we're really seeing that conservative bucket get a lot smaller. People who were telling me that their companies were conservative a year or two ago are now saying that they're more open to those new technologies. And this year, for the first time, I also asked participants to self-rate their company's attitude towards customer experience in the same way that they typically do for IT culture. So conservative would mean that they typically only offer voice interaction to their customers. More moderate would mean engaging customers through at least 2 channels, and also using performance metrics and KPIs that help them look beyond the traditional time-centric metrics. Looking at things that influence customer experience. Aggressive, which as you can see was a pretty popular category, means that these companies are trying to engage customers through the channels that they desire. So they're not just turning on new channels, but trying to gear those channels towards their customers' preferences. And also a big sticking point here was that they are measuring agent performance in most of these channels. And then bleeding edge goes even further. These companies see customer experience as a differentiator. They're strategically engaging customers through multiple channels. They're monitoring performance in these channels using KPIs like Net Promoter Score or Customer Effort Score that are really geared at looking at customer experience and strategically using analytics. So as you can see, really that moderate to aggressive area is where most participants fell, and the big differentiator there was definitely monitoring agent performance and interaction quality in non-voice channels. Okay, so before we dive into the data, let's look at some of the main trends we identified this year. Really, you've maybe seen me tweeting about it or blogging about it, but everything this year just really drove home one main point, and that is that it is time to stop talking about contact center and really start talking about holistic customer engagement. It's really not just about contact center anymore, and right now, viewing contact center as this separate entity just propagates this idea that all the departments that touch customer experience can run separately, and that's just not going to work long term anymore. So some of the trends that led to this overall statement, one is just the sheer number of vendors and solutions at play in the customer experience space. Leaders in this space are aware that there are too many disparate solutions deployed in their organization, and so there's a real effort to reduce and consolidate the number of vendors at play. But what was really interesting was that when I first began discussing this point with folks, most of them thought, oh yeah, we have one standard contact center vendor, but this vendor turned out to provide only their ACD and IVR, and then when I began pulling in other technologies like call recording or workforce management, analytics, CRM, they realized just how many vendors were in fact at play, because some of these solutions impact more than just the contact center. Meanwhile, customer engagement channels even further complicate things. We'll get into that in detail shortly, but the main point here is that companies are interacting with customers through more channels, but it also goes way beyond the contact center. And because of this, because of the different channels being engaged, workforce optimization needs have changed, although very few people seem really able to define workforce optimization, which we'll also get into shortly. And meanwhile, there's a new trend going on that we've been tracking since last year, and that's creating these centralized customer experience initiatives that are focused on understanding and improving customer experience. They're still new. They look very different from company to company, but we're finally starting to figure out what works and what doesn't. But again, each and every one of these trends hammers home the point that this is no longer just about contact center. We have to stop talking about contact center as if it's the center of customer engagement, just like it's a mistake to create data silos by keeping all your engagement channels separate. It's a mistake to create human silos by talking about your customer-facing departments as if they're completely separate. So let's start from the beginning and talk a bit about the tangled web of customer engagement vendors and solutions. We asked participants to rate on a scale from 1 to 10 their company's philosophy toward a unified contact center platform versus best-of-breed apps. So if they told me 1, that meant they wanted best of breed and were willing to sacrifice integration for that to happen. And if they told me 10, that meant they wanted a single unified platform and would be willing to sacrifice best of breed to get that. So of course, most people wanted something right in the middle that was best of breed but also integrated. However, there was really just a definite preference for integration over best of breed. So IT and customer engagement leaders are really starting to see the importance of a more unified platform. Unfortunately, most do not yet have that integrated platform. So first here, you can see obviously one of the biggest technologies in this space. Many of our participants are using some of the big names for ACD, Cisco, Avaya, Genesys, but then we did have a lot of people using other less commonly seen vendors or even homegrown ACDs. One thing we do ask participants is to self-rate the success of their contact center technology. So this is on a 1 to 10 scale, how well their contact center technology is meeting their business needs. So Cisco and Genesys came out on top here, Interactive Intelligence not too far behind, bit of a drop-off for ShoreTel and Mitel, and then Aspect, Avaya, and some of the smaller vendors near the bottom. So again, we don't ask participants here to specifically rate their vendor. We ask them to rate the success of their technology, and then we look at who they're using. So these would be who they're using for ACD. I won't have time to go over how this played out for other technology areas, so if that's of interest to you, shoot us an email and we can talk. We did also ask about plans to stay with or leave current providers, and we did find that those who were more satisfied with their technology were less likely to leave, basically meaning that technology features and performance can absolutely drive a company to move to a new vendor. And speaking of drivers for migration, the biggest driver we heard was just adding additional features like better multi-channel or mobile features. And we still had quite a number who were replacing old obsolete ACDs. And we did have some who were specifically migrating in order to move to the cloud. So in the IVR space, well, we had a lot of people using smaller vendors, and even a good number not using IVR at all anymore. We also wanted to show you guys some of the results from a separate study that we did on contact center total cost of ownership. The charts on this and the next slide come from that study, which is part live interview and part survey based. The basic takeaway here is that we do see contact center costs increasing, which makes sense given that the complexity of the contact center is increasing with more channels and newer technologies, with more advanced features coming into play. And that increase in cost also coming into play for IVR. We are also seeing that operational costs are increasing, which is an industry trend. We're seeing a shift in the way companies spend money on contact center technologies, much more OpEx-based instead of CapEx-based. So again, not only are overall costs increasing, but so are operational costs specifically. So speaking of OpEx-based models, we've obviously been tracking cloud interest for a while now, and you're looking again here at benchmark data. I just don't want anyone to get confused about data sources. So this year we saw quite a bit of interest in cloud, including some companies that, as previously mentioned, were switching vendors just to migrate to the cloud. And this is really the most interesting look here. So what you see is cloud interest trends between 2014 to 2016. And as you can see, while interest in cloud ACD was really kind of flat between 2014 and 2015, it's definitely jumped quite a bit this year. So the blue line is the percentage of participants who were using or planning to deploy a cloud ACD. Yellow is using or planning cloud IVR. Green is evaluating cloud ACD, and red is evaluating cloud IVR, which kind of has always been a technology that people were a bit more open to putting in cloud. But now people are gaining some trust, seeing that cloud solutions are more mature. And I don't expect this to be the year when everything goes to the cloud, but I definitely had multiple people who 2 years ago told me they'd never go to the cloud, now telling me that they're looking at it. So people from more conservative companies or more regulated verticals like financial services and healthcare. Now, ACD and IVR are not the only technologies in this space, even if a lot of people forget that. We looked at workforce management, and here we found a lot of people using homegrown systems, actually. Although everyone I encountered who was using a homegrown system was looking for a vendor-provided solution. We also had some people who didn't know what workforce management vendor they were using, and this was usually when a company had multiple contact centers and maybe one department was using workforce management while others weren't, which honestly just highlights the problem here. This is a solution that is a part of customer engagement. It might not seem so obvious to everyone, but it does impact customer engagement, and contact centers shouldn't be so much of an island that IT doesn't even know what workforce management tool a company is using somewhere. Really, communication should not break down that much. Call recording, another tool that most people forgot was a part of customer engagement. It's actually a pretty big part. We had a lot of people using various smaller vendors. Really, this was one where there was a lot of diversity in the vendors being used. So a lot of these vendors in this space offer nearly all of these technologies. And just to pause for a second, I did have someone point out to me, and I wanted to make sure I said this, that they felt that if vendors wanted people to buy all of these technologies from one vendor, from them, that they were doing a poor job of advertising it that way. So that was an interesting comment that was heard. But obviously the most combination is ACD and IVR. Most companies are using the same vendor for ACD and IVR, although not maybe as many as one might expect because some were using smaller separate vendors for IVR. We also asked about IP telephony and UC vendors because a lot of the bigger vendors also offer these things. And we did find that over 50% were using the same vendor for IP telephony and contact center. But UC vendor didn't really seem to come into play here except in many cases for those using Cisco. But we are seeing a lot of Microsoft in the UC space. And since Microsoft doesn't offer a contact center solution, obviously those people have to use a separate vendor for that. Now we've been tracking usage of Skype for Business or Link for voice and how that's impacting contact center. And those we spoke with for this benchmark right now aren't using Microsoft to provide the telephony for their contact center. So they may be using it for telephony elsewhere or even everywhere else, but not contact center. And I do expect to see that change, and we'll keep tracking it in the future. We are seeing, as I've said, a trend towards consolidating onto fewer vendors in customer engagement. Won't spend a ton of time on this slide. And who is this who is this impacting? Well, we did hear a lot of people say that they're eliminating Avaya, and then a lot of people planning to eliminate some of those smaller vendors that don't provide their main routing technology. So now let's talk about how companies are interacting with their customers. So in the past, we've always approached channel engagement by simply asking what channels are in the contact center. But this year, we actually broken channel engagement into even more layers. So the first question is just, what channels can customers use to interact with your organization? These interactions might go to any department. So the one exclusion here, we did not include in-person retail communication here. So when I say in-person is a part of that other category, I mean like an in-person help desk, say like a student center in higher education. We also had some people planning for even newer channels like in-car communications, and keeping an eye on how the Internet of Things and smart devices are changing consumer communication. So as you can see, tons of different channels into the organization. The next drill down is channels specifically into the contact center. Now what you see here are channels that may or may not be integrated into the technology. This is just these channels are handled by the contact center business unit. A couple of things to note here. We did have some people saying they are using team collaboration applications like Slack, and allowing things like users to submit tickets through Slack. Usually this was for an internal contact center, but this was a new channel brought up this year. Drilling down again, what you see here is channel integration into a unified platform. And now we've been tracking this for a year or so, so right now still some gaps. You saw on the previous slide that we had, for instance, over 85% of companies using email into the contact center, but only 28.6% are integrating it into the routing platform. We had over 39% on the last slide using real-time chat, only 17.9% integrating it into the routing platform this year. But as you can see, in the next 2 years, that'll be those green bars, people plan to really start integrating these channels. But this is probably the biggest challenge I hear about in all of these conversations, is trying to do multi-channel in such a way that creates a unified platform and allows the technology to pass information between channels. It gets especially tricky with channels like mobile and social that are usually handled outside of the contact center or by multiple business units. So not to be forgotten, outbound channels matter too. This is our first year looking at the channels that people are using for outbound customer engagement. Voice, email, obviously big here, but outbound SMS is a channel to watch. And last but absolutely not least, we asked about self-service channels. I want to pause here to point out voice as a self-service channel. This prompted a lot of really interesting conversations about treating IVR as its own channel and how IVR is really starting to change into something much more than just pushing buttons on a phone. We're starting to see technologies that are more virtual assistant-like, that are based on more natural language. Basically think Siri, but inside of an IVR. Just to provide you with one example that I hadn't heard of before, we spoke to one fairly large utilities company that was using a vendor called Interactions. And the way their technology works is that a customer calls in, that customer interacts with the virtual assistant IVR using natural language, so speaking naturally, not pressing buttons or using key phrases. And to avoid a common issue that happens with natural language, if a customer says something that the machine cannot understand, it actually sends a recorded audio clip to a human being who listens to what was said and tells the machine what was said. And to be honest, my first reaction when I heard about this was just, how can anyone afford that? But this company was definitely pretty happy, and it's really just a very interesting approach. So voice self-service is an interesting topic. I could probably do an entire webinar on that topic alone, but definitely a space to watch, especially as we see consumers get more and more comfortable with speaking to smart technology like Siri and Echo and other systems. Okay, I made a New Year's resolution to stop using the term omnichannel, but I had promised to ask about it before the new year, so we did ask about omnichannel, and by that I mean plans to enable contextual customer interaction information to pass between channels so that you can track a customer's entire journey. I like to call this multi-channel done right, and right now this is everyone's challenge. It's like the entire industry has taken a step back this year, is looking at all of these channels we just talked about and trying to figure out how to fix this tangled network. So very few people are there yet, but the majority are at least evaluating and trying to figure out how to get there. As far as the channels that matter most to customers, voice is still a front runner, but not as much as it used to be. Web self-service is pretty important, and email is still pretty important too. And keep an eye on mobile and social creeping into this even more so than last year. We did also ask about traffic to voice and non-voice channels and how that's changing. And I don't have that here, but we are seeing some companies reduce their voice traffic, but really only when they have strategies in place to drive traffic to their non-voice channels. It isn't enough to just turn these channels on. And if you want to talk about that, send me an email afterwards. We can talk about multi-channel strategies. Unfortunately, I just don't have time to go into absolutely everything here. Okay, so with all of these channels, obviously workforce optimization becomes even more crucial. But one thing I have yet to see nailed down is a solid definition of what exactly sets workforce optimization aside from workforce management. So what we did this year is a similar approach to how we approached channels. We asked about what one would consider optimization features, and beyond that, whether or not they were using these features to really see what this space looks like inside of organizations. So step one, does your workforce management solution support multi-channel? Most people said yes, and that was the case last year as well. However, this is one area where even though the solution supports it, a lot of people were not using this feature. More than half of those who had this capability were not using it. Another feature sometimes included in workforce optimization is included call recording. Most of our participants are using a separate call recording vendor. It's not part of their workforce management platform. 60% are using a solution that has quality monitoring features, but a whole third of those who have this capability are not using the quality monitoring. Coaching was a bit of a less common feature, with only 40% having a system that is capable of it. But most of those who had this capability were at least using it. So there's that. 75% did not have surveying as a feature of their workforce management solution. So most of them were using a separate vendor for surveying. And so that kind of sums up all the different workforce optimization features, or at least those we included here. And as you can see, this is a space where a lot of people are buying tools that are capable of so much more than what they're using them for. We still see a lot of people buying optimization solutions and then using them for just scheduling and little else. And that's an issue because as the ways in which we interact with customers change and become more complex, so does the management required in the background to make sure that you have the right agents with the right skill sets available at the right times and responding in the most effective way. But a lot of people really aren't even monitoring quality outside of the voice channel. So workforce optimization obviously is more than just a technology question. We also ask about the KPIs, metrics, and goals that are set for contact centers. This year, first call resolution was the most mentioned KPI, although a lot of people are still struggling to accurately capture it. But the big change for me this year was that for the first time, instead of just rattling off KPIs to me, a lot of people really emphasized that their KPIs and metrics were not the most important part of how they were evaluating success. So people are leaning more on things like speech analytics and surveys and quality monitoring programs, and really looking at more than just these traditional numbers. A lot more people knew about Net Promoter Score and Customer Effort Score this year. If you're not familiar, Net Promoter is calculated based on that survey question we've all answered. That's on a scale from 0 to 10, how likely are you to recommend our brand to a friend or colleague? And Customer Effort Score asks people to self-rate the amount of effort they had to expend to have their issues resolved. So we're seeing more emphasis now on measurements like these that go beyond traditional time-centric metrics into more of hearing the voice of the customer. And at this point, most companies are exposing real-time reporting statistics to agents, which we've identified correlates to both higher contact center operational success and higher customer satisfaction. So just a quick note here, because I haven't had time to really dig into these success factors. I told you all before how we ask participants to rate their technology success on a 1 to 10 scale. Well, we also ask them to rate the success of their operations, and that's the human side of things, as well as we ask them to what they believe their customers would give them. If a customer calling into the contact center, would they rate them, where would they put them on a 1 to 10 scale? Some of us some of them give us actual average CSAT scores for that. So we're able to use those numbers to run correlations to see what kind of technologies and practices people are using and how that might impact operational success and customer satisfaction. Won't be able to present that data here, but it is available to our clients. Quickly, we looked this year at gamification in the contact center. If you're not familiar, gamification is taking elements of game playing and incorporating it into how you run the contact center, so point scoring, competition, etc., using that to motivate your agents. Really, not a lot of people were using it, but important to note, again, with those success correlations, that those using gamification in the contact center rated their operational success higher, and they had higher customer satisfaction than those not using it. So this is something to look at. So finally, let's take a brief look at one of the newest industry trends we've tracked since last year, and that is the centralized customer experience initiative. So these initiatives are still fairly new. We began looking at them last year when many companies were just getting them off the ground. They can look very different between organizations. Some companies have a set-aside department specifically focused on customer experience. Some have a program where multiple business units come together to communicate and collaborate about customer experience. And some just have one person in their company who's been tasked with figuring this out, and we don't recommend that approach. But at this point, most companies do have a formal initiative. We see a variety of different levels of leader heading these teams, with the most common being the director level. We also asked participants to self-rate the success of these initiatives. A lot of people still feel they're too new to really rate yet, but some have been doing this for a little while, and we did find, unsurprisingly, that those companies who have a C-level leader heading this initiative have the highest success, which makes sense because you need someone with the ability to push change spearheading this. And really, nearly everyone has made formal processes for gathering information from the lines of business to improve customer experience. So those who haven't made this formal definitely scored the success of their initiative lower. So important to make this a formal team, a formal process, and really an official enterprise-wide focus in order to really set your customer engagement aside. Because as I've said, this really isn't just about contact center. Customer engagement goes far beyond that one line of business. Okay, I know I just shared a lot of information, so to just sum up our actionable recommendations before we open it up for questions. As I've said, the big thing here is that it's time to stop looking at contact center as a separate function. Yes, it is a line of business, but someone needs to be looking at the big picture, and that big picture goes way beyond contact center. Point two, I'm not using the buzzword here. I'm just saying if you're going to engage your customers through multiple channels, you need to do it right. You can't just turn the channel on and expect that to drive traffic to it. You need a strategy for effectively launching and managing each new channel, and you need to monitor quality in every channel and understand that each channel comes with different customer expectations, all of which need to be accounted for in your quality monitoring program. Point three, use the resources you've invested in. I pointed out a lot of the places in workforce optimization where the tool is capable of so much more than companies are using it for, but look beyond workforce optimization. Look at your routing systems, look at your analytics tools. Ask what they're capable of and find out what they're capable of and figure out why you're not using certain features or if it makes sense to use what you've paid for. And lastly, kind of just a re-emphasis on what I first said, get everyone involved in customer engagement. Start a formal initiative for looking at this. It's really everyone's business. It should be an enterprise goal, and it's not just the contact center's job. So as I said, lots of information. So if you have questions or would like to talk clients, you can contact us at client-services@nemertes.com. Non-clients, you can reach out to sales@nemertes.com. And I wanted to quickly let you know about next month's webinars. We'll actually be doing 2 in March. First is How Mature is Your Cybersecurity Program on March 8th, where our CEO, Jonna Till-Johnson, and our CIO, John Burke, will discuss our cybersecurity maturity model and provide actionable insights on improving your own security efforts. And then secondly, March 22nd, our president, Robin Garris, will present on UC costs, efficiencies, and staffing shifts. This will be data coming out of Nemertes' annual Unified Communications and Collaboration Total Cost of Ownership study. So if you're interested in either or both of these webinars, registration details will be available on our website. So with that, it's time for some Q&A, and I think Erwin is going to moderate that for us.
Excellent. So we do have several questions. Thank you so much, Lisa. First question, you talked a little bit at the beginning about customer success stories. Do you have anything that you can elaborate on those?
Customer success stories. I mean, so the one that I mentioned before about the company that was using interactions, I know that they, for instance, had felt that they had vastly improved their IVR self-service model, that they had a lot of very happy customers through being able to just improve self-service and voice for their customers. You know, some of the things that I didn't get to mention in here were some companies that have implemented things like video interaction, but it's not in the contact center. It's usually that was in like healthcare, and it was more working with doctors and nurses through remote video, and also we had some in financial services that were doing that, having in wealth management especially. And so some of those were more like elite programs to be able to allow customers to have kind of a better experience or a more personalized experience through some of the newer channels. Those would be the ones that come top of mind.
Excellent. So you mentioned you made a New Year's resolution to get rid of the term omnichannel or stop using it. Why?
Okay, so omnichannel. I'll tell you why I hate this term. Omnichannel to me is really just a marketing term. When multi-channel came about, it was never anyone's vision that we would engage customers through multiple channels that were completely not integrated and created little data silos. That was never the plan for multi-channel. But that's what happened because unfortunately people found that the bigger vendors maybe didn't do multi-channel well enough for them, so they started investing in these best-of-breed solutions, but they didn't integrate into their system, and so now they've got a chat program and an email program and a voice program and a SMS program, none of which talk to one another, and that was not the goal. And so what the industry did was they created a new marketing term, omnichannel, to try and get people to refocus on this as a new idea, but it's really not new. It's just we have to fix the problem that we created.
Excellent. And let's see, another question that came in. You mentioned that there were some, I'm trying to find the slide number here, people that were not using IVR. If they're not using IVR, what were they using?
They were trying to get people to an agent.
On slide 17.
Yeah, we did have people who were not using an IVR. There were two different scenarios that where this would happen. One would be folks who just haven't invested in one yet, and they were actually looking to purchase an IVR. That was usually a smaller contact center. It was a newer thing for them. And two, I don't want to discount this, people are turning off their IVRs because there is a lot of customer frustration with the IVR. We don't think about the IVR as a fun place to spend our time. And so what those companies are doing is just getting people to a live person immediately without an IVR.
Yeah, and it's actually, in some companies, something that they use for competitive advantage, that you get a live person on the first ring versus having to go through IVRs.
Right.
Okay. There was a comment more than a question. Please do an entire webinar on automated self-service, that it's a game-changing technology.
It is, isn't it? I was going to say one comment really quickly because we just talked about IVRs. What I'd really like to see in some of the really good companies would be if instead of using an IVR and then on the phone or whatever, if I was doing self-service on the web and called in, if that was part of my IVR, or if that at least followed me so that you knew who I was. Again, omnichannel, I'm not using that term, but
question about video interactions. Are you seeing any success stories, any people that are using video as an interaction medium?
Well, like I said, I just brought up the ones that we talked to in this benchmark. Nobody was using it in their contact center in this benchmark. That's not to say that nobody in the entire world is using it. I mean, I've certainly seen places where it's being used, but it's just not a very widely adopted channel. Where we see it is mostly in healthcare, financial services, stuff like that, where you have more of a specialist on the other end that's not like your typical agent.
And why do you think that is? What are the barriers, or what are the reasons why organizations are not seeing wider spread use of video as a channel?
I mean, there's a number of things I could comment on. Let's see. So first was just lack of customer demand. I know that, as generations shift, that a lot of people, use FaceTime to communicate interpersonally. But as far as wanting to communicate with a brand, not a lot of customers seem to want to put their face in front of the person they're working with. And of course, there is a case for a one-way video, which is what everyone expected to take off after like the Amazon Mayday button came in. But I think that the use cases where one-way video just made sense for the investment and made sense for a channel that you could actually drive traffic to, and you're not wasting money on having video there. Those use cases are pretty limited. Insurance claims would be a good one, and then of course healthcare and some financial services, and maybe even some higher ed, but that would be kind of internal. Then once you include video, I mean, you're talking a whole different set of questions you have to answer, like what agents am I going to put on video? How am I going to set up the room that they're in? How can I monitor the quality of video interactions? And that goes beyond the speech, but also looking at facial features and what's being said. It's just quality monitoring in video is very difficult, and it's really, really crucial. You can't really ignore that kind of issue.
Okay. And just a reminder, if you do have a question, please use the GoToWebinar control panel to enter that question, and we'll get to it as fast as we can. A question about contact center licensing when you talked about the TCO data. What does the actual license typically include?
That's really going to be dependent on the person, on the company and what they're buying. So a lot of the people that I spoke with, if they were buying from a Cisco or something like that, they were including ACD, IVR. Now the cost that you saw, I want to make sure that this is pointed out. The cost you saw broke it out between the applications. But when someone is purchasing contact center, especially with a vendor like Cisco, they're usually not buying ACD separate from IVR. Sometimes they're even bundling it into a larger purchase, like IP telephony is part of that. But multi-channel is usually separate. So usually there's like one level of licensing for voice only, and then you have to raise the level of license that you're buying in order to include multi-channel. Some people were not willing to make that investment, and so that again kind of propagates the problem of having the external vendors for multi-channel, because instead of raising their licensing cost with their ACD vendor, they're going out and buying a maybe cheaper solution to add on to the system, although it remains unintegrated.
Okay.
So
it's typically one license per agent?
It's usually, I don't want to say one license per agent, because there's licenses that can be used for multiple agents. So if you have like a 24/7 contact center, you might have 4 shifts of agents and one license for each of those agents, so concurrent.
Another question came in around Microsoft Skype for Business /Link. What are you seeing in terms of how organizations are integrating that with contact center, and do you have any sense of whether or not Microsoft will get into the space?
My thought right now is that Microsoft is going to be leveraging its partnerships to stay in this space. I haven't heard anything about them planning to acquire anyone and create their own solution. They obviously have quite a few partnerships right now. Genesys was a big one this year, and then tons of Clarity Connect, smaller in-house interactive. I could go down the list. We actually have a report on this. So if you're a client, we have a report on Skype for Business in the contact center. Definitely go on our website or email us. As far as what companies are doing, right now, like I said, the people who I've spoken with are approaching Skype for Business for voice first, and they're doing that separate from contact center. So they're looking at whether or not it would be used for internal voice and how it's going to work for them there. So they haven't gotten to the point yet where they're willing to put it into their contact center, because obviously if it doesn't work for them, then a customer calling in is not going to be very patient with a voice system that doesn't work. But then going forward, because we do have clients that we work with who are looking at Skype for Business in the contact center, and the goal is basically to use it as voice in the background with, if you can, some of their UC capabilities integrated in as well. So being able to leverage UC inside of the contact center. And there's a number of different vendors that they all work very, very differently with Skype for Business. So you really have to have a pretty in-depth look at what you're buying and how it's going to work to meet your specific needs before you pick a contact center platform that works on Skype for Business.
Excellent. Another question, a little different. Are there any vendors who offer a fully integrated contact center platform that includes things like workforce management, real-time speech analytics, and all of the other kinds of capabilities that you discussed previously?
Well, pretty much all of them are going to say that they do. So, I mean, that's the general answer. Some of them are OEMing portions of that. Some of them are going through partners for portions. But for most of the vendors that I have spoken with, there is a plan in place for a completely unified platform, whether it's through a partner or through an OEM solution or through a self-developed solution. They are not missing the fact that workforce management, call recording, analytics are all part of this package. But apparently, a lot of the IT leaders are feeling that the vendors are not doing a great job advertising it as a whole package.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then the last couple of questions, what analytics are you seeing people use on top of workforce management, workforce optimization?
Sure.
Are you seeing, for example, things like big data used to glean information out of those platforms?
Yes, yeah. We did ask about that. I just did not have time to cram it all in here.
Sure.
So big data, I do want to say that I did notice that this year analytics, people took a bit of a step back. I think they're trying to figure out the channel integration problem before trying to add more advanced analytics into the system to further complicate things. But speech analytics was obviously a pretty big one, although most people were using post-call speech analytics, so they hadn't moved to real-time speech analytics yet. Big data initiatives are starting outside of the contact center, but what we asked was whether or not their big data initiatives included their contact center. So we're seeing a movement towards moving some of the contact center data into an existing big data initiative. One of the things we've been tracking that I saw a huge step back away from this year was predictive analytics, and that would be analytic solutions that leverage business intelligence to create forward-thinking decisions or reports automatically without anyone needing to do anything. And I honestly, I don't think we had anyone no one who was doing it this year. I know that. Outside of maybe, outside of what I really wouldn't consider predictive analytics, which is workforce optimization solutions that predict upcoming peaks and valleys inside of the workforce management system. That's kind of been around for a while. But the more advanced ones that can predict whether a customer is likely to defect or stuff like that, that I didn't see a lot of people doing that. There's some interest, but like I said, I think it's just a matter of we need to walk before we run. So step back from that this year.
Excellent. And then the last question, speech to text. Are you seeing growing interest in it, any use of it? Anyone looking at things like wrapping analytics around speech to text solutions?
So we did not ask specifically about speech to text, and I don't want to misquote anyone. So I would honestly have to go back and dig in to see if anyone had brought it up. Nothing comes front of mind as a story that was brought up to me. I've certainly heard about it in the industry at large, certainly talked with vendors about it who have customers who are doing it, but for the people that I spoke with, it wasn't something that they brought up.
Okay, excellent. Well, with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up the webinar. Again, thank you very much for joining us and spending an hour on the phone with us. Again, please join us for our next webinar on Tuesday, March 8th at 2 p.m. How mature is your cybersecurity program, which will share some of the results from our next benchmark around cybersecurity that's currently ongoing. We'll provide a registration link on our website for that webinar, as well as the one later in March on unified communications and IP telephony cost of ownership. If you'd like to follow up with us, please contact us at client-services@nemertes.com, or if you're not a client, at research@nemertes.com. And again, we'll make a replay of this webinar available in about a week. Look forward to chatting with you, and if you'd like to participate in our research ongoing, please go ahead and respond in the affirmative to the post-webinar survey. Thank you again for attending.